clearly there's value in having a centralized area with all of those people who can have those conversations. Sure. And again, there's various industries that are regulated and require securities and obviously information to be held in accordance with regulations. But I think on the flip side of that, if there isn't a need, then you have to question what is the benefit. And it seems at the moment that the default response to that is, well, we want people to come together for cultural purposes, the business culture. And I've seen some interesting comments on that recently around, if you think you need an office for culture, then actually you've got a problem with leadership and you've got a problem with other areas of the business, because just by having an office, that's not how you build a culture within a business.
Hey everybody, welcome to Leading from Afar, a podcast by remote leaders for remote leaders, aimed at sharing knowledge and experience to help make remote awesome within your companies. I'm Scott Markovitz. I was the first hire at Envision and helped build the foundations of the company, from marketing, sales, product, operations, and pretty much everything between. I've also mentored and consulted with hundreds of early stage startups, including a bunch of remote ones. Each episode, we'll speak about hot topics, trends, and the future of remote work. We'll also interview some super smart leaders at all levels of remote teams and introduce you to new tools that can help you succeed as a remote leader. Hey everybody, thanks for tuning into today's episode of Leading from Afar. I'm Scott Markovitz, your host. Today I am joined by a very good friend, James Solomidies, who is the COO and co-founder of NearU. NearU is building a platform to help companies and their employees find and book flexible workspaces close to their homes. So we can call that third work location. They've also recently launched a community-focused feature, which helps the employees understand who's working from what space and when, really giving insight to the company to help organize team engagement and fun events when multiple employees are in a single location, and also helping their employees meet new people and build their personal networks. So in the episode today, we spoke about what companies versus their employees are looking for with where they're going to work in the future. We also spoke about how companies can foster team engagement and collaboration when employees are no longer in the same location. And finally, we spoke about how important community will be in the future of the office space. So there's lots of great stuff in here. I hope you enjoyed today's show. Hey, James, how you doing today?
Hey, good, Scott. How are you?
Oh, doing well. Thank you. I appreciate you joining. You're in London today. Is this the home office or is this one of the NearU type offices?
No, this is very much the home office. Yes, this is the small room, the four walls that I've spent a lot of time inside for the last couple of years. Yeah.
Nice. As long as you have a door that locks that kind of keeps the kids out, then that's all you can ask for.
That's it. I've got the door, and the temporary lock was a mid-lockdown purchase. When I realised that I did actually trial making a sign on a hotel door. I did trial one of those to let them know if I was on a call, but they found it funny to come in specifically when I was on call, so I had to go for the lock.
That's a good plan. Yeah. So. Kind of a quick kind of starter question that we've been starting off all the episodes with this week. Unfortunately, as we spoke offline, I forgot to prepare one, so I'm going to use one from the last episode. So worst case, 2 episodes kind of talk with the same topic. But probably about 3 or so weeks ago in Portugal, if you had seen the news, they passed a law very kind of supportive of remote work. Some of the topics in there were preventing companies from being allowed to message you after your office hours, having to be required to offer you remote work, and very much of kind of that friendly guidance towards support of remote work. Just want to know your thoughts on that. Is this something you think that we're going to see more countries, more cities roll out? Should it really be countries that are like enforcing this, or really should this become like a cultural thing that companies, I mean, this really probably should be a company decision saying, okay, no, we're going to set up 5 o'clock. We don't send you a message unless you're on a certain team or you're like on call. But yeah, let me know your thoughts.
It's a good question. I think my view on that is, I agree with you that it should really be a company thing. I don't know why we need a government or a country to tell us something like that. I think in terms of the kind of out of hours messaging, it's an interesting one because we're all accustomed to dealing with colleagues or customers or other individuals outside of our network around the world. So we're all fairly accustomed to dealing with different time zones. So if somebody when I go to bed messages me and it comes through at 11 p.m., I don't feel obliged to respond to them at 11 p.m.
Sure.
And they will understand that. And I think equally, if somebody on the same time zone emailed me at 11 p.m., I wouldn't feel obliged to respond at that time. So my view is it is one of those, and I have thought a fair bit about it actually, because with our own growing team, there are lots of things that come up in the evening and early in the morning, and everybody's now a lot more aware that we have other commitments, we have families, we have clubs, hobbies, so we might not always be able to respond there and then. But I think everybody we should be treated as adults, and we are accountable for doing what we've got to get done. And if something overly urgent comes up at 11 p.m. that does need a response, then hey, maybe we will respond to that. But I think there's a lot of crossover there with the kind of global time zone. So for me, it's not overly different to that. If it needs a response, then it can get a response. But if it's not hugely urgent, then I don't think it does.
Nice. I think I definitely agree with you. Again, this shouldn't be a company or a government saying this, but I do like the idea as a kind of stopgap. Hopefully, maybe we'll get into this conversation later, but certainly around the future of remote work will be at heart asynchronous first or by default, which in theory should solve out this problem. But in the interim, I think it's a great idea to try to hopefully maybe get companies and people into that mentality of, again, there was so much of that feedback of the loss of work-life balance and people working too much. And again, that was all pandemic related and had nothing to really do with remote related. But hopefully maybe get people in that mindset of, okay, there's a balance. This is when people work, and this is when people don't work. And again, I don't need to have that Slack or that Facebook, Scott is typing, or the little WhatsApp, double check, blue checks when I saw that you read the message, and now have that expectation of, okay, James is going to be replying back to me within the next X amount of minutes, versus I have gotten to that point where I send my message to James and I know James is going to take the time to read it, to think about it, to write it, to edit it, so on and so forth. Again, really around that whole ASIC model. But I like the idea of trying to have, again, some kind of stopgap of saying, hey, this is what culture should be like. This is what work-life balance should be. And for those companies who are not already moving in that direction, let's kind of give them a little kick in the pants to start moving in that direction. Yeah, but kind of as we jump in, normally the way that we start is telling us a little bit more about yourself and sharing the origin story of NearU.
Yeah, absolutely. So myself, I live in just outside of London, about an hour outside of London in the UK, with my wife, 3 kids, and a 1-year-old dog, 1-year-old Cavapoo called Buddy, who I can hear right now. My wife's actually getting ready to take for a walk, and he gets very excited when he knows he's off for a walk. Does he read the in-meeting door sign? He when he hears the word, he starts body slamming and jumping all over the place. But he's the only one who he does actually keep me company during the day. It's quite nice so we've only had him for sort of coming up to a year. Yeah. But during the day, when obviously the kids are at school and my wife's out, I bring his bed in here, and he keeps me company. He's my colleague for the day. The only other interaction I get in person with a lot of people for many hours. But yeah, so that's kind of me. I, for the last 11 years or so, I've been involved in the flexible workspace sector. So I joined it to be honest, it's pretty much the kind of only experience I've had within my professional career. I'm sort of mid 30s now. So I previously worked at a company called the Instant Group, and I started there in 2010 when flexible working was relatively unknown. Sure. Serviced offices at the time were primarily Regus and a couple of others, but it was very much considered a sort of a dirty word, serviced, if you like, in that if you were using serviced office space, you probably weren't growing as a business. You weren't serious about being around for a long time. And actually, it's interesting to see obviously how that's evolved. And now, if you aren't using serviced, you aren't growing quick enough. You aren't attracting the right talent. You aren't being risky enough and sort of entering new markets. So it's totally flipped in terms of kind of how it's perceived. And obviously the market has grown in terms of the number of providers, the types of space. It's very much moved on from a sort of a blue carpet, white walls world into obviously WeWork, which is probably the most well-known example. And in terms of NearU, so really the business itself actually was founded quite fortuitously in 2019 with Dan, my business partner. He actually set the business up as a platform and a way for students to find library space. So a way for students to book library space and guarantee that off the back of his own experience, he would commute for an hour or so to a library to study. I get there and there'd be nowhere to study. So partnered with sort of pubs and restaurants in a way for, say, for £5 a student to sort of get a guaranteed desk, cup of coffee and some Wi-Fi, and that was all that was needed. As I say, timing wise was incredible. Then obviously everything happened in early 2020 that did, and pivoted the business and saw an opportunity there in the sort of the co-working hybrid world. He and I got in touch and sort of got talking around the potential opportunities there. And obviously, given my experience over the last 10, 11 years within that world and sort of seeing things change and the connections, etc., and obviously what he'd already done in terms of building the basic platform, we sort of got together and NearU was founded as it was. It was actually called something different then, and we've since changed the name for various reasons. But the platform has grown incredibly over the last 6 to 8 months. It's very much moved on now in terms of what it was a year ago, from the coverage, the features, the usability, and all the sort of back end stuff that you can't see. And I think it's a fascinating time. The time that we're all living through has been widely commented on in many articles. This is a seismic shift in many people's lives, and one that we probably won't ever see again. And I personally feel very fortunate that with young kids, I'm able to now work for the next 30 odd years with this flexibility. I feel sorry for those people who have just done 60 plus years of working 9 to 5, commuting into the same place 5 days a week, and have now seen all of this happen and missed out maybe with children or doing other things, bits and pieces. I've experienced that for a number of years, and with my eldest two, my boys, I would put them to bed on a Sunday night, and I wouldn't see them awake until the following Friday. I was gone before they were awake, and I was home when they were asleep. Whereas now with my youngest, my daughter, for the last couple of years, I've got a different relationship with her because I've spent so much more time at home. I've had that flexibility, and I've sort of been able to watch her grow. The guitar behind me as well. About a year ago, I sort of picked up that with the extra time. I mean, I was spending 3 hours a day on a train, which now I've got 15 hours a week back. So there's. Again, it's interesting. Lots of people have sort of been quite vocal on there's a sense of a pressure to sort of do something with that time. But actually, I think it's just nice that everybody's been given that option. Not everybody, a lot of people have been given that option to invest it in different ways in terms of how they want to, which is great.
Yeah, I totally agree. It sounds like we have very similar stories of, when I lived in Long Island, I commuted down to the Wall Street area, was leaving before my then oldest was awake, coming back a few minutes before he was going to bed. I didn't have time at home, didn't have time with my wife. And as soon as I went home, I take my kids to school every day. I pick them up, I can take them activities, and the quality of life has changed significantly. And they could probably do a whole episode on the idea of what to do with that free time, that time that's free. And I know that's one of the things I think I've spoken about in previous episodes about how to recreate the commute, or people missing the commute, and said, okay, if you were commuting 30 minutes on a train, well, how about going for a 30-minute walk? Or if you're going to a NearU space, then maybe a 30-minute walk. Okay, instead of maybe driving there, you're now walking there, and you're still doing that 30 minutes. And now, or even when you're coming home, you physically leave the house, leaving kind of, the home life. You take that walk, whether you're coming back to your own house or you're going into a NearU space or somewhere, and you're walking into the door, you're now walking into the work environment. So it's taking that time that you had and kind of repurposing it and learning. I used to sit and listen to audiobook to read books on the train. Okay, well now if you're on a 30-minute walk, you listen to audiobook. So it's not like you're losing that time, you're just redesigning how you're using it.
Yeah.
But maybe before I dive into the first question, if maybe you can just give a little bit more background of exactly what NearU is. Because there's probably a lot of listeners will hear the word flex space and they're probably thinking of these old school office towers where it's a whole floor of, in theory, like a company with hundreds of desks or tens of desks all over the place. And instead of a whole company being in there, you just kind of book your space at an empty space. But that's obviously, I think, not the real where the business is going. And really, it's more, I think you've hinted on it, on repurposing bars and restaurants and spaces that are underutilized during the day. And so maybe to give a little bit more sense of exactly what NearU is and what it does.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. So in summary, NearU it's a mobile app that enables individuals and businesses to book on-demand workspace and meeting rooms from as little as an hour through to a day, a week, a month, however long is needed. But ultimately, it's all about giving choice. It gives individuals that choice to choose the right environment for any given day based on how they're feeling, the mood they're in, the type of work they've got to get done, external circumstances. And there's lots of different use cases. It may also be that an individual is responsible for booking meeting rooms. So rather than having to ring around and sort of find out who has lots of different meeting rooms available, the app enables very quickly somebody to find different meeting rooms and book those meeting rooms. And if somebody maybe doesn't or can't make the commute for whatever reason, they perhaps can't want or don't want to work from home, they can also find spaces near to home that give them that professional environment whilst also cutting down on the commute, saving the money on the commute, the time, obviously reduction in carbon emissions from a sort of business's perspective. So that in summary is really what the platform offers. There is a whole sort of back-end platform as well from a business's perspective, sort of data management, real-time insight in terms of who's booking spaces, where are they going, what are they spending, adding, removing employees. There's a lot of that administration as well that you would expect. So from a business angle, it's a great way of seeing, when given the choice, how are individuals actually using these different spaces. Is there a trend in terms of where they're going on any given day or the type of spaces they use? And then actually there's an additional offering that we have relatively recently rolled out that sort of goes into a little bit more detail around the sort of advanced analytics, data and insight, which for larger scale businesses is then great from almost an assessing perspective of how effective is the current portfolio and potentially what should it look like moving forwards based on the real data. So that I think is a really interesting area where businesses are looking for more and more data because this is relatively new. We're all still figuring this out. Nobody knows where it's going to end up. So rather than a lot of guesswork, which is what we've seen in the past, some businesses saying, well, we think this is what we should be doing, therefore we'll do it. It's using the real data and helping to inform those businesses to make those decisions. And also, I think a point worth noting is as the platform's evolved and we sort of pivoted from that student positioning to sort of the corporate world, there is a certain level of standard, I suppose, and certain criteria. So we've moved away from the sort of the bars and the restaurants and the repurposed coffee shops. So it is very much proper workspaces. Hotels actually, which interestingly have started to move into this space. Their membership lounges, business lobbies, those sort of areas. So the idea behind this is really to give a huge range of spaces, a really diverse range. From a business's perspective, it's effectively one supplier. So there are other sort of, the WeWorks, the Regis, who are offering something similar, but obviously it is a single product. Whereas the benefit here is that we aren't tied to a single product or type of space. So we can work with our clients to really ensure there's sufficient coverage based on wherever they need us to be.
Yeah, I think that leads me in probably to my next two questions. You had mentioned both the business aspect and the employee aspect, and also the availability. WeWork is great. I remember the first time I went to a WeWork office. Again, I've mentored probably over 1,000 startups. I've come across so many in the time. It's very rare that I come across a business and I'm like, holy crap, wow, they really onto something. And I remember the first time I went to a WeWork space, I had one of those moments. I was like, damn, they really figured out something here. But that said, WeWork is a tier 1 city business. Right? The value proposition is in New York, London, something like that. It's not a tier 2 city, a tier 3 city, a more small town type place. And that's where especially as people move on, that's where most of the business or people will live. It's outside maybe certain urban areas, and that's where there's a lot of opportunity where, again, these larger companies are going into. So having that opportunity where you can support your team that doesn't necessarily live in London, doesn't necessarily live in New York, and still give them access to the space they need. Yeah. But kind of going in, and I'm going to cut into two sides, first on the business and second on the employee. From the companies that you're working with and the people that you're speaking with on the business side that are obviously very focused on this hybrid remote, companies more interested in having, we'll call it, all their employees that are coming into an office, and again, whether it's 3-2 or whatever that looks like, into a central headquarters to one specific location, or are they starting to look into what Standard Chartered in the UK is doing, renting out Regis offices all much more closer to the office? So is it the idea like that central headquarters, is it really dead? And if it's not, are there certain maybe types of companies that would really benefit from this hub and spoke model versus okay, got to get everybody into this one central headquarters, again, whether it's 3 times a week, 2 times a week, what have you?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a few points to the question there. I think firstly, just to come back on that WeWork point, again, I echo your opinion. I think WeWork is a fantastic product. I personally really like the space, but it's a very Marmite product. And it's really interesting because previously when you had Regis and you had a few others, there wasn't as much of a dividing opinion because it was very much a handful of providers offering different flavors of a similar type of space.
Yeah.
WeWork came in and sort of turned everything on its head and said, look, we're going to, ping pong tables, foosball tables, tens of thousands of square feet of communal space, free beer. We kind of know what they're offering. And that was very different at the time. Obviously, it's now evolved, and there are lots of others sort of offering similar.
Sure.
And they've obviously reined in the free beer, and again, that was an evolution for themselves. I remember. I remember it was free unlimited beer, I believe, 24 hours a day when they first launched it, and then quite quickly they started saying, okay, maybe not before 10 a.m. But I think in terms of that product, like you say, they are very much a tier 1, maybe some tier 2 cities. But the UK, for example, we work 50 locations, roughly, give or take, and about 45 of those are in central London. So, we've got one in, I think, maybe Edinburgh, Manchester. But as you say, for a business who is centrally London-based, great, it works if all of your staff are commuting in. But then it does also raise the question, if all of your staff are commuting into a central point, is it easier just to get them all together? Is there huge value then in having them dispersed across a number of centres when they're all physically within a couple of miles of each other? Versus actually, if you have a company that's dispersed across the country, the value then all of a sudden diminishes in terms of having that as a single product. Now, IWG Regis is similar, but obviously on a much bigger scale, 3.5, roughly, 3,500 locations. But again, it comes down to that question of, is that a diverse product if you're offering that? So Standard Chartered, obviously the example you used there was the sort of the flagship announcement that IWG announced in terms of their first large client.
Yeah.
But actually, again, IWG have fixed locations. Now they are in far more diverse locations in sort of secondary, tertiary cities. So the likelihood is there will be one that's relatively closer to some of those employees, but still across a workforce of, I think the figure from memory was 85,000 employees perhaps signed up to this initially. There will be a sizable number of employees who still have to commute a fair distance to the nearest IWG centre. So whilst it is perhaps, say, a better offering for a staff base of that size, it perhaps doesn't still accommodate all of those employees that maybe need those alternative workspaces. Are we saying that even if it's 2 or 3%, that's still hundreds of people that maybe don't have another option? They just have to work from home, and from those individuals working from home, again, we know off the back of many studies over the last couple of years that lots of people firstly don't want to work from home, but of those that don't want to work from home, there are plenty that physically can't work from home. They may flat share, they're working on the end of their bed or their parents' bed, or they've got loud kids, or they whatever it might be. So I think there's all of those considerations to kind of build into that. In terms of sort of the question around a central HQ, I think there's still value in having a central HQ to some degree, but again, it totally depends on the business. If it's a business that just doesn't need that centralized HQ, and off the top of my head, I can't think of any sort of specific industries, but if it's got to come down to that individual business as to whether or not there is value in having that. If it's maybe a call center and those calls can't be had from home for various reasons, if it's a bank call center, for example, discussing sensitive information, then clearly there's value in having a centralized area with all of those people who can have those conversations. And again, there's various industries that are regulated and require set securities and obviously information to be held in accordance with regulations. But I think on the flip side of that, if there isn't a need, then you have to question what is the benefit. And it seems at the moment that the default response to that is, well, we want people to come together for cultural purposes, the business culture. And I've seen some interesting comments on that recently around, if you think you need an office for culture, then actually you've got a problem with leadership, and you've got a problem with other areas of the business, because just by having an office, that's not how you build a culture within a business. So it's an area that's evolving, and I think it's becoming, business leaders are becoming more aware, or employees are becoming more aware, that actually there's a shift that's needed in the mindset from these leaders, these decision makers, and whether that's retraining leaders, because there is blame now being put more and more on the leaders and the decision makers, but actually when we take a step back and think about it, these people have had to evolve just as everybody else has over the last couple of years. They've been thrown into this situation just as we all have. So that's where I think there'll be a lot of change and, I guess, improvement, where we see these individuals maybe being retrained, and we see businesses putting a lot of time and effort and resource into saying, okay, well, this situation, whatever we want to call it, is not going away. It will probably continue to evolve. So the last thing we want to do is try and go back to how we all were. And equally, what we don't want to do is say, right, well, this is how it looks today, so in 2 years it will also look like this. We need to embrace that mindset of continually learning and adapting. And I've heard some presentations by a number of business leaders who are embracing that, and it's great to hear and it's great to see where they understand that things are continually changing. So what it looks like today, in 6 months, it will be different. There will be new software products, training courses, new thought leadership in terms of how things should look. So in terms of the sort of the centralized HQ or the totally remote, it's definitely not a one size fits all. And that's where, as long as a business and as a decision maker, leadership group within that business, you are open to considering alternatives, I think that's where the mindset shift needs to come from. And it may be that actually, once you've considered all of these, you end up back where you were because that was the right fit. But I think it's very short-sighted if anybody sort of blinkers and says, no, what we're doing works, therefore we're not going to evolve, we're not going to change. I think is the key kind of takeaway there. And I think I'm just trying to think in terms of the other sort of bits and pieces of the question. But kind of, it was actually something I heard a while ago, just a very simple point around the terminology. So if a company does then decide to embrace this new way of working and have this sort of working from anywhere, simple things like calling it a central office or or remote still implies that there is a primary and a secondary place to be working from. So it's just changing the way we talk about those things, and everywhere is remote. We have the option to work from an office that is here, or your home, or a number of third spaces in the middle, and it's either linear or circular rather than hierarchical.
I definitely agree. I think the idea is, one, after this pandemic ends, we kill off the word or tag remote work and replace it with remote life. I'd also like the word to kill off hybrid remote, all those things. It's either work from anywhere, which again then connotates you can decide where you like to work, again, whatever that may be, or office-based or partial office, but making it much more clear. Again, it's you have the flexibility to decide where you want to work, when you want to work, or there's some type of requirement. But I do like what you said before, that really this comes down to, I think, management and leadership, and the idea of the office being where culture happens. I've had this debate many times, especially in social media. It has nothing to do with culture. Your ping pong table, your craft beers and things like that, again, were great for your 20-somethings, young professionals who their whole social being was work. It was at 6 o'clock. It was either going home to an empty apartment or playing ping pong and having a beer with the people you work with. That's great for that subset of people. But for the people who are married, who have kids, they tend to leave the city. They move out to the suburbs, and they tend to have a commute. And they want to get the hell out of the office as soon as possible to get home, to spend time with their family and things like that. So that ping pong table, that chef, and all those things that you had in the office, which are really built to keep people in the office. They weren't really incentives or here's reasons to come into the office. These were reasons that once you're here, to keep you here and not to go home.
Yeah.
Obviously have nothing to do with culture. And I really like the second point of now it's really upskilling managers. This is obviously why this podcast was created, to share 10 years of experience building and leading remote companies and remote teams and saying, here's what I've done, here's what worked, here's what hasn't worked, because there isn't so much out there. And you can't blame the people who've been failing at this the past 2 years, because obviously they didn't choose it and they had no other options. They didn't have access to training or upskilling. And then I think that's, the next 18 to 24 months, it's probably the most important thing, is to give them the access and create this content around of how to do these things remotely. But not to kind of delve on this topic too long, now we're going to pivot to the second side of the employees. So it seems, again, companies are much more essentially thinking of the central headquarters because of the culture piece, which is, again, I think both of us agree, and a good amount of the cases is nonsense. But from the employee side itself, it seems there's much more desire for that flexibility. Again, with all the research that's out there. So from what you're seeing of people who are using NearU, maybe on the individual employee side, what are they more interested in? A specific location, like that's kind of like their desk, every day they come to the same specific place? Or is it more, okay, this morning it's raining, so I want to go to the local whatever. No, I need energy, so I want to go to the hotel lobby because there's nice kind of music in the background and things like this. And at the end of the day, I want to go work from the nice, shady coffee spot with jazz music. Like, what are people, I guess the individual employees, what are they looking for more?
I think it's interesting, actually. I maybe smiled. I don't know if I did smile. In my head, I smiled when you mentioned the weather, if it's raining. And that was something that I sort of put a bit of thought into. And actually, there are so many different factors that impact where somebody wants to work. I mean,
sure.
we know when we wake up in the morning how different the morning can be. If you think, well, what do I want for breakfast? What am I going to wear today? Is it cold? Do I want to go out? There are so many different decisions and choices we make in the first hour of being awake. And it might be that the night before we thought, well, this is where I'm going to work from tomorrow. You wake up and it's raining, and you think, actually, I don't want to work from there because it's raining. So it's a generational thing. Perhaps it's become more and more common that the sort of the on-demand thinking. I mean, the whole shift where we've seen with Uber and Airbnb, and it's very much if I want something, then I book it there and then. I don't want to have to plan. I mean, Netflix, for again, it's not having to plan or wait a week to be able to do something. It's waking up and thinking, well, it's that almost instant gratification, and that's evolved and sort of. We've found that now within the workplace environment, because we've been given that choice, we are starting to be able to really think on the spot, what's the right environment now for me to do this type of work? And somebody might change 3 or 4 times a day in terms of where they do things. So they might do the first couple of hours while the rain stops from home, have the first cup of coffee, and then think, right, I'm now going to, drive for 10 minutes to the local space because they've got some great music and it will get me through the next couple of hours. And then, okay, well, now I need a change of scenery again because I've got a couple of calls this afternoon that I need to work from somewhere different. So it's really just, again, comes down to that choice. Every individual is different, and every individual it has different moods within different days, and they have different types of work that they need to get done. So regardless of sort of who these people are and what they've got to get done, it's all about just that choice. And that choice has come from being empowered by employers who now see these individuals as, they are trustworthy, accountable, they're employed to get a task done, not employed to come in and sit at a desk for a certain number of hours and then go home and then come back and do the same thing 5 days a week. So it's very much that shift now to, we know better than anybody as individuals the right type of space for us to do our work. And
Sure.
People have been empowered to get up at 5 a.m. if they want and do 3 hours of work and then take 3 hours to do something else.
Yeah.
If that's the way that their body works and that's the way that they find that they're most productive. So there are still plenty of individuals who like the routine and the rhythm of going to the same place 5 days a week and sitting at the same desk.
Sure.
But fundamentally, they have the choice now to be able to do that, just as the people that find that very, very unproductive now have the choice not to do that. So again, it's a real mix. I think that there are plenty of surveys that have been done, and the stats always vary, but I think it's typically between sort of 75 to 85% of individuals want some form of hybrid working, some sort of flexibility whereby they have the choice and they're empowered to choose the environment they work from on any given day.
Yeah. So do you see out of the 3 types of locations that are going to be available, do you see any of them being a dominant one within the next few years?
I think, again, there are so many variables and it's so dependent on individuals. But given the statistics around the high portion of employees who want that flexibility, I think the office itself, so sort of as we sort of said, the centralized office, if you like, the headquarters, I think we'll continue to see that maybe being utilized 2, maybe 3 days a week. I think equally the sort of the home working will just depend on an individual's circumstance. If they have somewhere that's set up to work from, then and they're comfortable working from there 2 or 3 days a week, great. But there are hundreds of thousands of people who do not have that environment, who need a third space, who need a third type of environment. So whether that is just walking 5 minutes, 10 minutes to a local Costa or Starbucks, but as we know, there are lots of challenges there, or whether it is finding an on-demand solution like NearU and thinking, okay, well, this is the type of work I've got to get done. This is the right type of environment. Let me book it for a couple of hours. Let me book it for a day. It just totally depends. And I don't think we have the data yet to really understand which of those 3 types of environment, if you like, will come out on top.
Yeah.
But I expect there will be trends in terms of demographics, ages, backgrounds, locations, type of businesses that start to evolve, and we start to see those. And that's what will be really, really key for businesses. Again, it's that data, because if you understand, well, I suppose on the other side, if you don't understand how your staff are using space, the impact could be huge. If you aren't offering the right type of environment versus a competitor who is. Firstly, from a productivity and an output perspective, there will obviously be differences, but also, as we've seen in many businesses, if you aren't offering something that one of your competitors is, that is an attractive perk from an employee attraction and retention perspective, then that's where you'll see staff going. We saw years ago sort of Google, Facebook, with the slides and the sleep pods and the pancake parlors and everything they possibly could to entice employees from one to another. And now that shift has obviously evolved from not just being in the office, but what else are we now? All of those perks only attracted people to the office. We've now got to make sure we're offering those perks for individuals who aren't in the office as well. So whether it is something like access to an amount of spend, we're seeing these home office setup stipends, a couple of £100 to sort of fit your office out, or whether it's a recurring spend if you're using a platform like NearU to sort of work from somewhere locally. It's that acknowledgement from employers that we need to up our game slightly now. We can't just sort of rest on our laurels and sort of say, well, this is what we've always done. It's kind of worked, therefore it's fine. So, now what else can we do to really make sure that we stay ahead of our competition and we are offering all of these different spaces to our staff, see how they use them, and from that we can look at what does our future portfolio look like. Is it effective? Great if it is, if they're using the spaces, but if we see from the data that actually somebody's using a shared venue a mile down the road from one of our offices, there perhaps is an issue there. We can look into that in a bit more detail then.
Interesting. Yeah, I definitely agree that perks and benefits certainly need to be redesigned as we move forward. The kickoff episode this season was specifically on that topic of benefits and perks for the new future of work as we're moving. But around like the hybrid model, you kind of mentioned this maybe 2 or 3 days in the office. Facebook and Apple and all those were looking to go in that direction until they kind of had a mutiny on their hands. But it seemed like the idea with this 3-2 model was, okay, we as a company can now force that collaboration, force that interaction, force that engagement those 3 days a week when everyone is forced to be in the office. So it kind of makes it easier for us because we don't need to do remote culture. We just need to do our office culture and let the other 2 days kind of, we don't really care about. But obviously that was never feasible. It's really not going to be feasible that you're ever going to get everyone back in the office. So with that in mind, and certainly this work from home or this work from a third location becomes more of the dominant, maybe combined force in the future, how can companies ensure that they're able to engage and build that collaboration within their team when they don't see each other? Again, if you're not able to force everyone into the office on the same day to now take care of those opportunities, and people are spread out in different spaces, NearU spaces, where people are working home or whatever it is, how can companies still do that and make sure that they're doing those collaboration or engagement when people aren't there together in person?
I think it's an area that's evolving, and similar to obviously spontaneously, I think there's a lot of software that we're seeing pop up that is purely focused on trying to solve that problem.
Yeah.
I keep doing this, but that is a problem that 2 years ago we didn't have. I remember doing sort of 1 day a week from home for a number of years, which was very much the anomaly. And many of these calls I would always be dialing in on a certain day, and I would be the only one on the call, and there'd be occasions where you'd get forgotten on the call. I think that area in terms of the video software, will pivot and will really change the remote work and the kind of collaboration. I mean, we've seen, I think Facebook recently announced their virtual reality or the sort of augmented, in person where you have your sort of avatars. And I think there will be more and more. I've spoken to a couple of companies who offer something similar. And I think it's an area that in 2 years will look very different to how it is now, because we just don't know where the real kind of challenges will continue to play out, because we are relatively early on in this whole process. NearU, for example, has a new feature that we recently rolled out called Who's Near You, and the idea behind that is purely to encourage that inter-person collaboration without forcing people back to a kind of head office. So the idea behind that is you can see where your colleagues and your wider network and connections are working from on any given day. So rather than just calling them up, if you are local to them, or if you are traveling into somewhere and they happen to be there as well, you can have that dialogue, and you can say, hey, look, let's kind of catch up in person, because there is value, there is unquestionable value in being together in person 100%. with people. And that's why the office is never going to die, because I think it's still a crucial part of the toolkit to allow people to sort of work together. But forced collaboration, everybody get together on a certain day. The question is around how much value is there. I think there's value in getting together with your sort of teammates. If there are people that are in a certain team and they're doing a similar type of work as you, then there is value in getting around a whiteboard and throwing some ideas around and just sort of having those conversations. But equally, the sort of the water cooler moments, if you like, were more probably among colleagues who were in different departments. That's where there's a totally separate challenge is, well, if you're in a business of even a few hundred people, you probably won't ever cross paths now with people that don't work on in terms of similar lines of what you're doing. So how do businesses encourage that? How do they really sort of, I suppose, foster it and enable it? How do they enable that cross collaboration? And I think that's where Spontaneously is obviously a great platform, because it's totally random. You need to have that element of speaking to people outside of your circle of colleagues, because without that, you just sort of maybe find yourself in a bit of an echo chamber. There's no diversity of thought, which is quite, I suppose, detracting from innovation. So I definitely think in terms of the collaboration on certain days, there is value to an element of the forced, but I suppose the pre-arranged collaboration. But again, it shouldn't just be, okay, well, on a Wednesday, everybody will come to this location and you'll all have something to talk about because that's how it's going to work. It's really got to be a lot more thought into specific individuals coming to a specific location that works for whoever is chosen on that given day. If you've got a team of people in one side of the country and a team of people on the other side of the country, and they're collaborating separately, there's no point bringing everybody into a centralized location when if something can be done more locally would be just as valuable. So again, it's an area that is still evolving, and we just still don't quite know the best way of doing it. But I still think it will play a key part, definitely. Yeah,
I appreciate the points around spontaneously. It really came from kind of a pain point that I had as an extrovert and as being a remote worker for 10 years, missing those micro interactions, missing those conversations, getting up every hour to go have a schmooze with somebody at their desk for 5-10 minutes, going to Starbucks for a coffee. And to the point of the kind of the outside your core team, it was interesting when Envision had an IRL almost about 3 years ago now that I went to in the States. Every one of the meals was like a sociology experiment. Every one of the teams sat siloed together, right? Your iOS team sat with your iOS team, your APAC sales team sat with your APAC sales team. And me, either being an extrovert or because I was the first person there, and everyone there came after me. I never met 90% of the people on a day-to-day basis. I never had any interaction with 90% of those people. Every one of those meals, I specifically sat at a different table to meet new people. And my team gave me a hard time, like, oh, why don't you come sit with us? I'm like, listen, I talk to you every day. I know you. Like, these people, I don't know them, and I'll never get to know them outside of this environment. So I definitely agree that there's such an importance to be able to break out of that kind of core team and be able to meet other people and have those conversations and get those insights. And I think even within the team, I saw it was interesting. We had many conversations around it, that the EMEA team that I was part of was not as kind of tight-knit as the team that was based in Australia. And really the difference was the teams in Australia, I think most of the people were in Melbourne, that they got together and worked together in person like once a month, and they went to dinner or did whatever they did. So they had that in-person interaction on at least a monthly basis. So they're in Slack, telling jokes, having lots of fun, and you could see like that camaraderie. And then the EMEA team, like when we took over, that like just wasn't there because we never had the opportunity to meet. We never had the opportunity to have those kind of moments. And for me, it was kind of trying to intentionally create those opportunities to have those conversations with my colleagues on a regular basis. So I think even within your own core team in a remote environment, you don't necessarily speak to them on a one-to-one level. Maybe if you're doing like a daily stand-up, you kind of do your whole work thing. But on that, like, hey, what's going on? Like I heard, how did your kid do? Did they win the game last week? How was your trip here? And those moments aren't possible. So yes, I certainly agree that it's now those tools are being created to mimic those experiences. And the work stuff has always been there. For 10 years, we've been using tools like Basecamp and Trello and Asana and all those other ones. Even when we may have been sitting right next to each other in an office, we're using those virtual tools to work. And then when you remove the office, well, the tools were already there that we were already used to, and we just kept moving. That's why I think productivity was so great during the pandemic. But nobody ever thought about redesigning or recreating those conversations, those moments in a remote environment, even kind of hacking together the tools that were there. And I think has been the big impact by, you're seeing this cultures in the office and all the other kind of nonsense that's out there. But I think maybe to the last question that I have, I want to bring a point that you mentioned with the latest feature that you've rolled out. And I think this is, to me, probably the most crucial and critical feature that you can roll out into NearU and similar products, is that, hey, I as an individual, again, maybe I'm not coming to a space where I'm having 15, 20 type colleagues that are there, but I want to go to those spaces and interest in those spaces in part because of the people who are there, for the opportunity for networking and getting to meet new people and collaboration and things like that. So I'd love to hear a little bit more maybe about that actual feature and maybe what you're thinking about in the future to really help the individuals who are not, again, going to maybe a space where there's a whole bunch of their colleagues. How can an individual going alone, we'll call it, or maybe with one other person, build those relationships, build their networks, build their community within the spaces that you offer?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the feature itself, we've launched kind of version 1 a couple of weeks ago, and there's obviously a roadmap of version 2 and beyond, and there's things that we know we can improve. But essentially the concept is for both employees within larger organizations who have colleagues that are all utilizing the platform, but equally, as you said, individuals who are looking to build their network. So there's the ability to filter between a colleague tab and a network tab. So network, maybe friends, family, or other connections that you have met whilst working from these different spaces. And anybody, you can invite anybody who is also on the platform to join that list, and you can obviously toggle on privacy for various reasons, obvious reasons. But the ability there within that feature is that you can look forward and plan who's working from whether they are people you specifically do or maybe don't want to work with for whatever reason. and you then have that option to message them in app, and you can have a sort of a chat with them about, hey, look, you're working here, let's get together and collaborate. And again, it's that hyper local collaboration element. It's not forced, but you're doing it because it's productive. So you're choosing to do that specifically because maybe the location works, or the day works, the person is really relevant to who you need to speak to, or maybe it's just somebody that makes you laugh and you think, do you know what, I need to get out and be with that person for whatever reason because we used to chat about sports or hobbies, whatever, and we haven't done it for a while. So again, it comes down to that individual level of where is the value, and whether that value is specifically productivity related for your output, or is that from a well-being perspective. There's only that individual knows why. So the feature currently works on a calendar basis, and you can, as I say, it gives you the visibility as to where individuals are on a specific day. The times, again, if the times correlate to when you might be there, you can maybe get a couple of your colleagues together and all book into the same space. And future plans around the sort of map views, those sort of things, so you can see where people are geographically. There's kind of features around meetings. If you're meeting certain people and somebody's running late, there's all of that sort of the possibilities are huge. So I think it's a really exciting feature, and it's definitely an area that there is value on both a small scale for somebody to almost build their own network, almost a social network within that, but also on a larger scale with large scale employers to sort of have that very simple interface that helps you interact and know where your colleagues are going to be when actually everybody is dispersed, and that might be across a town or a city or a country or globally. If you're traveling, you might feel a little bit out, you don't know where you're going maybe after a couple of years of not having to do this. So when you go somewhere new, to know that you've got a colleague also working from the same space, or somebody you've met in the past that's working from the same area, it's just that sort of level of comfort that can be bought by having something similar to that.
I love it. I think hopefully this brings out what the real concept around co-working is. I remember the first time I went into these spaces, I was always amazed. Like, I had this concept in my brain that it was just a whole bunch of people sitting all in kind of an open space, and like you're collaborating and you work for a different company. I'm having this issue with like onboarding and I can't figure out. I grab like you people here in the kitchen, I throw something on the whiteboard, and like I just get collaboration feedback. But when I would go into all these spaces, WeWork or Mindspace or whatever they may be, and it's like all these glass boxes, all the doors are shut, like there's nobody talking, there's nobody. I'm like, sorry, what's the point of working from here outside of maybe saving money in office? But like you're missing the whole collaboration piece. Like, I thought that's what the value was. So it'd be interesting to build in that real opportunity to give people that heads up, hey, these people are going to be in here. These are the types of people. So maybe you want to have these conversations like you said. And I think even on the company side, there's a lot of value there to know, hey, if 20-30% of my people are going to be in the central London within this specific space time here on this day, hey, maybe this is a great opportunity to do a team fun event. If I know there are going to be a lot of people here, let's take advantage of everyone being here on this time and then do one of those maybe in person or whatever type of events that they're doing. Yeah, very cool. I think that's a real big opportunity is that community piece and how you give opportunity to networking, because people are so desperate to get that networking, build their network, who's going to be there. And I think that's a lot of value of, hey, if I know James is going to be at the space, hey, I want to work there because I know James and I get along well. We could talk and we can go to lunch, and it provides that extra value of, okay, yes, I can't work from the house, or I don't want to work from the house, but the fact that I know who's there gives me more of that incentive to maybe go here or there, or just to use the service. That's awesome.
Definitely. Thank you.
So we're going to go into the kind of rapid fire type questions. So it's going to be 5 questions. First idea that comes to your head, go for it. You ready?
Yep.
All right, question number 1. Who's one remote leader that you look up to and why?
Wow, remote leader. I think generally PwC. There was a quote recently, Tim Ryan, the US chairman, who essentially echoes my views. I think they somebody in power within a large scale organisation who is quite vocal on embracing this new flexibility and empowering businesses to sort of make that change.
Interesting. So that may cover question number 2, but just in case, a slightly different answer. What's your go-to source for tips, tricks, ideas on how to do remote the right way?
There are a couple of thought leaders, I suppose, who I consider thought leaders from, I suppose, to get you thinking. Behind the thought leaders, but in terms of sort of making me question, okay, is this the right way of doing it? I hadn't thought about doing that on LinkedIn. They're quite vocal on LinkedIn. Caleb Parker, who runs the Bold podcast, he's quite vocal in terms of it's very much the office and home and other options. And another guy, I think he's in Canada, Dave Cairns at CBRE.
Yeah, I had him on the show last year.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, I've never actually spoken to the guy, but seems like a great guy from what I read. And he's quite vocal in terms of not being too concerned about what people think, but deliberately kind of being maybe provocative in what he's saying. But I think there's a lot of truth, and it's always quite interesting to read what he's saying, but also the comments and how it's received and how people can consider that.
Yep. Question number 3, a office-based company approaches NearU saying, hey, they want to move towards being a remote company, and they ask for your advice. What's the first thing that they should change to do remote work the right way?
I think they should understand what their employees want is the first thing, because if their employees are all happy, and listen to it, because if their employees are all happy coming into a central office 5 days a week, then it's potentially a waste of time. And equally, if their employees all say, well, 5 days a week we want to be anywhere in the world, then it's a totally different conversation. The likelihood is there will be a portion that say, hey, 5 days a week in the office works for me, and 5 days a week from home works for some of the others, but the vast majority will probably want a bit of both. I think that's really the first thing that needs to be done before any other conversation is had. So understand from the source exactly what problem or challenge you're trying to solve.
Yeah, awesome. Question number 4. What's one thing that people typically get wrong about remote work?
I think the biggest frustration from my side when talking about the NearU platform, for example, is people say, oh no, we're good. We offer hybrid working, people can work from home if they want.
Yep.
And what has very rarely been considered is that portion of staff who can't work from home. And you're offering a rotational basis and saying, well, look, everybody can come in 2-3 days a week. The others, you work from home. This is great. Dust our hands. We've done it. Hybrid working sorted. But you've then got a large portion of staff who are struggling daily working from somewhere that is not productive, that potentially is unsafe from a health and safety perspective. And your employer is not really considering you as an individual. They're saying, well, look, we've kind of done the vast majority. 95% of people are sorted. That 5% across a large organization is a lot of people who every day are being paid to work from somewhere that's not the right environment. So I think that's kind of the biggest thing I think people are getting wrong is hybrid work doesn't just mean office or home. There's a lot more to be considered.
Yeah, love it. Last question, kind of related. Is the idea of being forced to go back into the office really over and dead with?
I suppose in a word, yes, I think it is, because employees are voting with their feet. And if there is a company that fundamentally will not budge from that position, they will unquestionably lose staff. So again, over time, I think as that evolves, businesses who are drawing a line and saying, this is our position, you come back or you don't have a job, will perhaps have to evolve that when they do start to lose the top talent.
Yeah, completely agree. So last but not least, where can people get a hold of you, find more about what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So you check out the website, NearU, which NEAR, then the letter U.io. Email me, james@nearu.io. You can download the app. It's free to download on iOS and Android. Check out the coverage, check out sort of the process, the user interface, how it works. And really key point to kind of reiterate is it's totally pay as you go. So anybody can use this. You can sign up, start making bookings. There's no sort of paywalls, memberships, subscriptions. I suppose in summary, if you have to kind of think about it like almost like an Uber model, it's there for the times you need it, and as you see the need.
Awesome. I think the last thing we didn't talk about, but I think it's important to that. Where are the spaces available? Is it just London, just the UK, or? No.
So it's totally global. So currently there are about 700, and we're increasing that daily. We've got a team of people who's dedicated to growing that, and fundamentally we aren't tied to where we have locations. So if there is a gap, or if there are spaces or areas, that you need a space, that businesses need spaces, we can be led by those clients and quickly onboard spaces for them as is needed. So totally global, no limitations.
Amazing. James, thank you so much for joining today. I appreciate the conversation. And until next time, everybody, have a great day. Thanks again, everybody, for tuning into today's episode of Leading from Afar. If you enjoyed the podcast, you can learn more on our website, leadingfromafar.com, and subscribe to the podcast in your favorite app. This podcast is all about you, the remote leaders. We'd love to hear from you with your feedback or ideas for future topics and remote leaders we should be speaking with.